Welcome to the weekly Torah Power-up in less than 10 minutes. Based on the wisdom and teachings of the Rebbe, brought to you by Chabad of Nebraska. What do we do when mitzvot clash? What do we do when we have two mitzvahs that seem to not be able to go hand in hand? And specific, we will talk about the mitzvah of Shabbat and the mitzvah of circumcision. Circumcision, the Torah tells us, is meant to be done for a baby boy when he's 8 days old, on the 8th day after his birth. We are meant to circumcise the child and bring him into the covenant with God. And Shabbat is actually a very major issue to draw blood. So even if someone has an appointment of some sort, unless it's a medical emergency, we may not draw blood on Shabbat. So if actually someone strikes his friend and causes blood to come out, he's actually transgressing two things. He's transgressing Shabbos by making blood come out of another person, and he's also transgressing the avera of hitting another person. Just interesting things. So what do we do when a baby is born on Shabbos and his bris, therefore, 8 days later, would be on Shabbos? What do? May not draw blood and may not cut a human being on Shabbos. However, there's a mitzvah to have it done on the 8th day. And in this case, as is in many other cases, the mitzvah of circumcision pushes off Shabbos. And we actually do the circumcision on Shabbos. There are many rules surrounding it, very interesting concepts, making specific sure that the mohel, the one who is performing the circumcision, doesn't carry the mohel kit, the bris kit, as it were, to carry it in the public, as you're not allowed to transport things in the public domain on Shabbos, so on and so forth, many different things. And the Talmud discusses the reasoning why the mitzvah of circumcision is so powerful that it pushes off the amazing mitzvah of Shabbos. Now, there are other mitzvahs that obviously come into contact with one another, and they sometimes clash. And there are specific rulings with each mitzvah when we choose one over the other, what the rules are, and the specific parameters. But specifically when it comes to the mitzvah of circumcision, we say that it supersedes Shabbos. And we have the bris on Shabbos. As a personal note, my circumcision, my bris was on Shabbos. I was born on Shabbos, and therefore it was on Shabbos. And it's another interesting note is that if a bris should be pushed off for any reason, it would not be able to be on Shabbos. So you can't push it off and say, oh, I want to do it on the weekend, and then have the bris done, everyone can come in on Shabbos. If it has to be pushed off for medical reasons or whatever, the bris may not be pushed off and then land on Shabbos. It will always be on a Sunday or on another weekday. Now, the Talmud discusses the reasoning why specifically the idea of circumcision, this mitzvah of bris, pushes off Shabbos is stronger than Shabbos. And one of the very powerful points that we bring out is that if we take a look back, the mitzvah of the bris, the mitzvah of circumcision, is actually something that existed before the Torah was given. The first person that was given the commandment to perform a circumcision and then continued that mitzvah for generations to come was our first forefather, Abraham. He was commanded by God to perform a circumcision when he was actually 99 years old, very old man at that point. And the tradition was given and the mitzvah was given for him to do it for every child that's 8 days old. And his son Isaac was actually the first one to have his circumcision on the 8th day of his birth, after his birth. And that was obviously give or take, about 1,000 years before the Torah was given. Sorry, not 1,000 years. That was about 500 years before the Torah was given. The Torah was given about 500 years later. So, seemingly, the mitzvah of the circumcision is really before the whole Torah was given. And if we take a look for a moment and we see who this man, Abraham, was, first of the forefathers, he was something very special. He actually realized the existence of God way before anybody else. There was no monotheistic religions at the time in the world, and he, at a young age, looked up at the stars, and he looked at the world, and he said, there must be a God. This was Abraham, a very wise man at a very young age, who was able to realize the existence of a monotheistic creator, a single one creator who had created the entire world. And what's very interesting is that in the Torah, it doesn't mention any of the story. The first time we meet Abraham is when he's born, and then the next time after that is only when he's 75 years old, and when God is telling him to leave his homeland, leave his place of birth, and travel, be nomadic for a while. That's the first thing. We don't discuss anything about his history of how he realized God was there. And as the Medrash tells us, that he fought for it, and he had to give his life away. He was challenged, and he fought, and he made it after a while. But it wasn't easy for him, and he actually gave a lot of himself over to this idea, to making sure that people understood this concept of one God creating heaven and earth. It wasn't easy, and none of that story is there. And the very simple reason for it, and the very basic reason for it, is because Avraham's relationship to God was a relationship that didn't have to be based on any reasoning, any give and take. It was simply a relationship of God and Avraham, that God had chosen Avraham. God chose him to be the father of the Jewish people, and that his lineage would go on forever being the chosen people that had nothing to do with any kind of performance or any kind of action that had to be taken. God chose the Jewish people. God chose Avraham to be the father of the Jewish people simply because he was who he was. And there is no action that needs to be taken. There is no nothing that the mind can understand, and no real intellectual reasoning that can bring it together. It's simply God's choosing it. And this ties in very, very strongly with the idea of circumcision. The idea of circumcision, sure, it has very strong reasonings and intellectual reasonings, but there's a certain aspect of it that it is a child of 8 days old can have a strong connection, an inseparable connection with God, with something he doesn't even understand. And obviously the child doesn't understand. The child's a baby. He doesn't understand anything. So that is the basis of the relationship between the Jew and God, is based on this concept, this circumcision, which is done at a very young age, before intellect gets involved, before your mind starts taking over, on just a raw base relationship between man and God, between the Jew and his creator. And this is really something that is signified by Avraham, and why circumcision is so powerful, and the mitzvah supersedes all the other mitzvot. It's concept of being above and beyond intellect, above and beyond everything, just connecting to God and being there, performing for God and being with God, not performing. And obviously that brings with it a responsibility and a desire to do what God wants. But it has nothing to do with your performing action. You're a Jew, and you're a good Jew no matter what you do. You are a Jew, and you connect to God in that way without actually having any performance needed or any intellectual connection needed. Of course, the intellectual connection bring it more personal, and they connect things a little bit differently. But on the base level, we are connected no matter what. There's nothing that we can do about it. There's nothing that we can do to enhance it or to take it away. It is there, and we are connected to God, and that is it. I'd like to wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos, and we'll see you next week. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video. If you have any questions on this Torah Power-up or any other Torah Power-up, please leave the question in the comments down below, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Shavua Tov.